On a silent night in 1788, in the eastern lands of Europe, a great army was moving slowly through the darkness. The moon had disappeared behind the clouds. The road was uncertain. The ground was damp. And every step made the exhaustion on the soldiers' shoulders feel a little heavier. The soldiers had been marching for days. Sleep was irregular. The cold had seeped into their bones. And the night, with each passing hour, grew deeper and heavier. This army belonged to the Austrian Empire. Their mission was clear: to find the Ottoman forces, observe their movements, and prepare for an approaching conflict. Near the town of Karánsebes, the silent advance continued. Orders were whispered, and as horses' hooves touched the earth, dull, muted sounds echoed in the dark. But what would happen by the end of this night was written neither on maps nor in military plans. Because in this story, there was no enemy waiting ahead, no Ottoman troops, no cannon fire, no rising battle cries. There was only the night. There was exhaustion. There was confusion. And there was the question of how a small misunderstanding could spiral out of control. A whisper, a shout, a word heard incorrectly, and a panic that spread silently. An orderly march slowly began to unravel. Soldiers could no longer recognize one another. Shadows in the darkness looked like threats, and fear, without any hurry, slipped between the ranks. This is the story of one of the strangest and quietest nights in history. A night when an army fought against itself. A story of losses without an enemy, of order collapsing in a single night, and of the truth slowly revealing itself when morning finally came. Now, relax. Let your shoulders loosen. Slow your breathing. If you enjoy resting with calm, slowly narrated historical stories like this, you can subscribe to the channel and always join these silent journeys. Now come. Let us return to 18th century Europe, to this army moving through the darkness, and slowly listen to how everything began. Chapter 1. An army on the move in 1788. The year was 1788. Europe had long been accustomed to war. Empires kept their armies constantly on the move to defend their borders, to expand them, or at the very least, to avoid losing them. The Austrian Empire, too, was engaged in a difficult war with the Ottoman Empire that year. This war did not advance with clear lines drawn on maps, but slowly through mountains, rivers, and small towns. The Austrian army was moving through what is now Romania. Near the town of Karánsebes, the objective was simple: to locate Ottoman forces and prepare for an organized confrontation at a suitable position. The army was large. It was made up of soldiers from many different regions: Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Croatians, Italians. Many of the soldiers did not even speak the same language. This was a common situation for armies of that era. Chapter 2. The night march begins as night fell. The army was still moving forward. For 18th century armies, marching at night was difficult. There was no artificial light. Maps were limited. Communication was not carried out by shouting, but by whispers. Soldiers recognized one another not by their voices, but by their silhouettes. The moon slipped in and out of the clouds, making the road visible at times and then plunging it into complete darkness. The ground was damp. The night was cool. Boots had grown heavy. The march was orderly, but slow. No one wanted to speak. Exhaustion had tied everyone's tongue. Chapter 3. Fatigue and the thinning of discipline. This army had been on the move for days. Rest was irregular. Sleep was short and fragmented. Some soldiers had not truly slept for days, not just hours. 18th century soldiers did not receive psychological support like modern armies do. Fatigue was often carried in silence, but fatigue was something that thinned discipline. Orders were understood a little more slowly. Reactions were a little delayed. Minds lingered on details that would normally be ignored. Still, from the outside, everything appeared to be under control. Asterisk. Chapter 4. The cavalry takes a break as midnight approached. Some cavalry units moving at the front of the army came to a brief halt. This was not in order, recorded in official reports. That during long marches, especially for advance units, short pauses were not unusual. The horses were tired. The riders wanted to loosen their legs. Among these cavalrymen were small barrels of wine. In the 18th century, wine or similar drinks were not considered a luxury for soldiers. Water was not always safe. Wine was both drinkable and durable. One sip was taken, then another. No one intended to become drunk. But tired bodies reacted more quickly to alcohol. Asterisk. Chapter 5. The relaxation brought by wine as the wine was shared. Muscles relaxed. The bite of the cold softened. For a while, the soldiers stopped thinking about war. Whispered conversations began. Short sentences. Half-finished memories. Some recalled the vineyards back home. Others spoke of campaigns they had joined before. These moments did not seem dangerous, but discipline was a very thin line. Before wine loosened the tongue, it had already softened attention. Asterisk. Chapter 6. As the rest of the army approaches meanwhile, the main body of the army continued its march. The infantry, moving through the darkness, noticed a group of cavalry stopped ahead of them. Sounds coming from a distance could not be clearly distinguished in the night. Someone was heard laughing. A metallic sound rang out. The low noise of horses followed. Tired minds began to perceive these sounds not as they were, but as what they could be. Chapter 7. The first misunderstanding. One soldier misinterpreted a sound coming from afar. He thought he heard a word, but he could not be certain what that word was. Among soldiers who spoke different languages, such misunderstandings were already common. That night, fatigue and wine made it even worse. A whisper spread. It was quiet, but it passed from ear to ear. There is something. No one was shouting yet. No one was afraid yet, but order was beginning to slowly unravel. Asterisk. Chapter 8. Sounds within the night. As the night went on, it grew quieter, but this silence was not completely empty. The wind gently stirred the leaves of the trees. A distant horse whinnied. There were dull metallic sounds as pieces of equipment brushed against one another during the march. On a normal night, none of these sounds would have drawn attention, but tired minds made every sound feel slightly more important than it truly was. The soldiers moved through the darkness, not with their eyes, but with their ears and ears. At times, hear not the truth, but what is expected. Chapter 9. Languages and misunderstandings. The Austrian army was not made up of a single nation. The empire's borders were vast. Within the army were many different peoples. German speakers, Hungarian speakers, Slavic language speakers, Italian speakers. Many of these soldiers understood even the same command through different words. Under normal conditions, training would overcome this, but it was night. There was fatigue, and the wine, which softened the mind, had begun to take effect in some places. A word that meant nothing to one soldier could sound like a call of danger to another. Chapter 10. The first raised voice at one moment. Within the night, a voice rose slightly higher. It was not a shout, but it was not a whisper either. It was simply a soldier speaking a little too loudly to the man beside him. In the darkness, the source of the sound could not be clearly identified. Some paused. Some turned their heads. One soldier interpreted the sound differently than it should have been. At that moment, the line between reality and imagination grew a little thinner. Chapter 11. The word Turks. That night, the word that would enter history was not shouted, but spoken in a broken tone. A soldier, perhaps trying to joke, or perhaps simply under the weight of exhaustion, said a single word: Turks. This word did not mean the same thing to everyone. For some, it was just a word. For others, it was the name of the expected threat. One person laughed. Another stopped. A third tightened his grip on his weapon dot, and the word slipped out of control. Chapter 12 Information, flowing in the wrong directions. The word Turks did not spread like a command. It moved in fragments. One soldier passed along what he heard. Without fully understanding it, another combined the word with his own fear. A third, already tense, magnified the threat in his mind. And within minutes, in different parts of the army, the same word began to circulate with different meanings. No one stopped to ask, what is really happening? Because in the darkness, asking questions felt like a waste of time. Chapter 13. The first shot somewhere. A soldier believed he needed to defend himself. There was no clear target in front of him. But there were shadows. There were movements. A weapon fired. A single sound. Short, sharp. That sound split the night in two. There was no turning back. Chapter 14. The chain reaction. When the gunshot was heard, another soldier did the same. Then another. Who was firing? And at whom was unclear. But the sounds multiplied. Artillery units, interpreting the distant noises as an attack, joined in. As the thunder of cannons shook the night. Panic had now fully spread. Chapter 15. Mistaking friend for foe in the darkness. Soldiers, in the darkness, could no longer recognize their own units. Different uniforms, different hats, different languages. Every movement was perceived as a threat. Orders could not be heard. Commanders shouted, but their voices were lost. Horses panicked. Artillery wagons overturned. The wounded began to scream, but even these cries gave no clarity about who was who. Chapter 16. Panic does not arrive all at once. It spreads slowly. But once it spreads, it does not stop. Soldiers began to retreat. But they did not know where they were retreating to. Some ran. Some dropped to the ground. Some continued to fire. Order completely collapsed. An army was now moving against itself. Chapter 17. As dawn approaches hours past, the night slowly began to give way to a gray light. Gunfire faded. Cannons fell silent. Fatigue settled once again over everyone. But this time, along with fatigue, there was confusion. Chapter 18. The truth revealed when the sun rose. The scene became clear. There was no Ottoman army present. No attack. No ambush. Only the losses suffered in a single night. The dead. The wounded. Scattered units. The Austrian army, on a night without an enemy, had harmed itself.
Chapter 19. Historians' Interpretation. Years later, historians examined this event. Charles Kirk described that night as the greatest single loss an army inflicted upon itself recorded in the 18th century. The numbers were not exact, but estimates spoke of around 10,000 dead and wounded. Chapter 20. A Silent Ending. This event was not spoken of for a long time. It was embarrassing. It was difficult to explain. But history is made not only of victories, but also of mistakes. This night quietly reminds us of what human exhaustion, misunderstanding, and panic can lead to. Now, slow your breathing. The night is over, but the story continues to flow in silence.
Chapter 21. The Silence of the Commanders.
With dawn, the commanders slowly emerged. No one was shouting anymore. No orders were being given. Everyone was trying to understand what had happened. Maps were unfolded. Scouts were sent out. But the result did not change. There was no one there. The commanders looked at one another's faces. No one spoke aloud. Sometimes silence is a confession. Chapter 22. Gathering a Scattered Army. The Austrian army moved not to fight, but to pull itself together. Units were counted. Names were called. Those who did not answer were noted. The wounded were carried. Some could walk. Some could only look on. This was a regrouping not after a battle, but after a night in which no battle had taken place. Chapter 23. What remained in the soldiers' memories. The soldiers never forgot that night for the rest of their lives. But most of them did not speak about it, because it was difficult to explain. There was no enemy. There was no heroism. There was only chaos. Some, after that night, could not sleep in the dark. Some startled at the smallest sound. This, too, was one of the unseen faces of war. Chapter 24. Official Records and Silent Pages. The incident entered the official records only in a limited way. Details were few. Sentences were short. Night confusion, friendly fire, unexpected losses. No one wanted to say the army fought itself. Some pages were kept deliberately brief. Chapter 25. What was the Ottoman army doing? What was striking was this. The Ottoman army was not far away that night, yet it was unaware of what had happened. The next day, when they saw the Austrian army already scattered, they did not face an attack, but a confusion. Sometimes wars are won not with swords, but with mistakes. Chapter 26. Were there similar cases in history? As historians examined this event, they came to a realization. There were small, similar incidents, but on this scale, almost none. That is why the Battle of Karánsebes entered history books as an exception, like a lesson, but a lesson rarely spoken aloud. Chapter 27. The Human Factor. This story was not about weapons. It was not about cannons. It was not even truly about strategy. It was about people. Fatigue, fear, misunderstanding, and the feeling of being alone within a crowd. When they come together, they can make even the greatest armies fragile. Chapter 28. Time flowing after a single night. Days passed. Months passed. The war continued. But that night remained off to the side, like a footnote, but a heavy one. Time covered it, but could not erase it completely. Chapter 29. Strange Moments in History. History is often remembered through great victories, but sometimes the most instructive moments are the strangest ones. What happened at Karánsebes whispers this to us. Not everything goes as planned, and sometimes the greatest danger is not in front of us, but within us. Chapter 30. Stories Without Victory. Some stories are not about winning. There is no clear superiority, no outcome to be applauded. In these stories, there is only what happened. The night of Karánsebes was not a night that anyone won. But it was a night when everyone lost something. Order was lost, trust was shaken, and the army began to doubt its own strength. Chapter 31. Time slowly covering everything. Time slowly lays a veil over events. As days pass, details begin to fade. Who stood where? Who heard the first sound? Who fired the first shot? These questions never find certain answers. And in time, they stop being asked. The night of Karánsebes, too, remained beneath this silent cover of time. Chapter 32. What was left untold. This event, for a long time, was not spoken of loudly, even among soldiers, because to tell it meant to remember it again, and to remember meant to face oneself, to feel fear when there was no enemy, to fire when there was no order, to point a weapon at those you stood beside. These are not memories easily carried. Chapter 33. Silent Lessons. What happened at Karánsebes was not read aloud in military schools. But between the lines, it was always there. The importance of discipline, the fragility of communication, the effects of fatigue, and most importantly, how a person, even in the most crowded place, can feel deeply alone. Chapter 34. Loneliness within the crowd. An army is made up of thousands, but when night falls, each soldier is left alone with his thoughts. In the darkness, you cannot even make out the face of the person walking beside you. You hear only footsteps. You feel the breath. And sometimes this uncertainty opens the silent door to fear. On the night of Karánsebes, that door slowly opened. Chapter 35. Small Causes, Great Consequences. That night, nothing was great on its own. A fatigue, a sip of wine, a word, a gunshot. But when they came together, the outcome became irreversible. History is often written in exactly this way. Not by great causes, but by small things layered one upon another. Chapter 36. The Weight of Being Human. The soldiers, beneath their uniforms, were human first, capable of fear, capable of mistakes, capable of error. The night of Karánsebes reminded this in a painful way. Even the most disciplined structures are made of people, and people are never entirely predictable. Chapter 37. The Silent Edge of History. Some events stand at the very center of history. Others remain at its edges. But those at the edge sometimes say more than what the center tells. The Battle of Karánsebes stands on this silent edge. It does not shout. It does not boast. It only reminds. Chapter 38. The Whisper That Remains Today. Today, as you listen to this story, there is no longer any danger. The sound of weapons has fallen silent. The night has long since passed. All that remains is a gentle whisper. Things are not always as they appear, and sometimes the greatest confusion is born from silence. The commander's inner reckoning. For the commanders, this night was not easy either, because this was not a battle lost against an enemy. It was a moment when control was lost, and control is the thing a commander wants to trust most. But that night, control was in no one's hands. The silence of official history. Over time, the event was mentioned less and less. In official documents, it was passed over in just a few lines. Details were erased. Causes were softened. Because history does not always tell everything. Some things it quietly sets aside. Military lessons. After this event, small but important changes were made within armies. Night marches were planned more carefully. Communication between units was strengthened. Greater emphasis was placed on discipline. But no measure could completely control human nature, and this too was accepted. Human nature. The Battle of Karánsebes tells us this. A person is different when tired, different when afraid, different when feeling alone. And when these states come together, they can shake even the strongest structures. Meaning that changed over time. As the years passed, this event came to be seen not only as a military mistake, but as a human story. The chaos of a single night, a misunderstanding, and panic growing without control. These were not only part of 1788, they belonged to every era. Looking back from today, we can look at this story from a distance. There is no longer darkness, there is no longer danger, there is only a story being told. But this distance does not lessen its impact. On the contrary, it allows us to see more clearly. A soft warning of history. History sometimes warns loudly, sometimes with such silent stories. On a quiet night, it does not speak loudly, but to those who listen carefully, it tells a great deal.
The story slowly unraveling. Now the story can unravel piece by piece. Details may lose their importance, Names may fade. All that remains is a feeling, a silent night, a slow walk, and a misunderstanding growing uncontrollably.
Giving space to the listener. Now this story can slowly withdraw for you as well. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to follow it. Just listen to the rhythm of the voice. As you drift toward sleep, your breath may deepen. Your shoulders may relax. Your mind can slowly step out from within the story. There is nothing left to tell. Only the night remains and your sleep.
This story. Here, in the depths of darkness, in silence, echoing with quiet footsteps, on a night in 1788, in Eastern Europe, far away, it happened. Once there was a great army there, but now this army had vanished into the dusty pages of history. And you, here in the safe and warm silence of your own room, doing nothing, simply listening to your breath, can begin to relax. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and slowly exhale. Feel the weight of your body spread into every corner of your bed. Your shoulders loosen, your toes release. Imagine that silent night of 1788. The Austrian army moving through darkness, feeling their steps press into the earth, hearing the dull sound of horse hooves, sensing the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. Glasses filled with wine, soldiers joking among themselves, their laughter slowly replaced by growing silence, and then a faint panic. Everything flows so slowly and quietly, as if time itself had frozen. Now, as all these images fade in your mind, simply follow the rhythm of your breath. Breathe in and out. Breathe in and out. Each breath pulls you deeper into sleep. This story, here, in this moment, quietly ends. But you have not yet awakened, and this silence wraps you safely. On one hand, the story of soldiers lost in the dusty pages of history. On the other, your peaceful breath. They merge together, and you drift toward deep sleep. Relax. Feel your body, its warmth, its release. Feel your mind. Watch thoughts slowly drift away. And if you enjoyed this story and wish to take more quiet journeys through history, you can subscribe now so that each night we can dive together into the depths of history